The U.S. Department of Energy is cleaning up the Oak Ridge Reservation of residual hazardous and radioactive contamination left over as a result of decades of nuclear energy research. Much of that work has been influenced by the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board, a citizens panel that provides independent advice and recommendations on DOE's cleanup operations. You're welcome to attend the meetings and be part of this important work. For more information, call us or visit our website.
Members of the public, I'd like to remind everyone to sign in at the front if you're a visitor, to wear your name tags, and to use the microphone when you need to make a comment. Board members, also please remember to use your microphones and to use your name tents to be recognized. When the question and answer period after the presentations, we will take comments from board members first and then the public at the microphone. The next meeting will be on July 11th, and the presentation will be an update on ORNL cleanup. Tonight's presentation will be on the Y12 cleanup status, and the presenter will be Laura Wilkerson. We will move on to service awards to our outgoing members. Sue?
Light is on, so I think you all can hear me. Is that right?
Sure.
All right. Well, I'll talk from here, and then I'll move up to where our small tokens of appreciation are. I guess this is a sad event for me because we are losing a number of very valuable members of the Site-Specific Advisory Board. Tonight we're actually honoring the departure of 5 members, including Ed Juarez and Gloria May and Ron Murphy and Steve Stowe, there he is, and Betty Jones, who's absent tonight. She wasn't able to be with us. And I must say, even with the short time that I have been a part of the Site-Specific Advisory Board, I certainly recognize the amount of time and dedication that these members have all contributed, and what a loss it will be for all of them to be departing. I believe you all are going out at the end of June. So that's the sad part. I think that the encouraging part is that we have gotten approval for refilling 7 positions, and so there'll be a new class coming aboard, and I hope that our outgoing members will be willing and able to provide some mentoring and some advice to them. I think that would be very much appreciated. So with that, I would like to say and recognize that these individuals that I named have served in a wide variety of leadership positions on the Site-Specific Advisory Board, both at the board level as well as the committee level. And they do represent the very best of selfless dedication to their communities. Combined, all 5 of them represent 32 years of service to the Site-Specific Advisory Board. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? Yes. And they've been instrumental in just about every area of the board, drafting recommendations, helping to expand the board's public outreach programs, representing the board at national conferences, and of course spending endless hours attending meetings and providing leadership to the board. There's no way really to adequately acknowledge their contribution, but I would like to present them with a very small token of our appreciation, and I'll ask each of them to go ahead and come on up as I call your name. Mr. Ron. Thank you so much, Ron.
Thank you very much.
Your leadership has really been very much appreciated. We're going to miss you. All right, Mr. Steve. Steve, your leadership as well has been very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Yes, we're going to miss you.
Been fun.
Hopefully you have a very good place to display this.
Can I go now?
Yes, yes.
Fun job.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
Look at that print. That's good, thank you.
All right. Ed? Our vice chair. Ed, I know you wavered a bit, but
Yeah.
we're sorry that you're going, but wish you the
Okay.
best, of
Thank you.
course.
Thank
Yes.
you very much.
And Gloria, another long-standing member. Gloria, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You will be
Appreciate that.
missed. Yeah.
Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so once again, we hope that you all will not be strangers, and you will be greatly missed. So, thank you.
We'll go on to the comments from our DDFO.
Take this off. Use this. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. I guess I have a couple of comments. First and foremost, in terms of bringing you up to date on what's going on across the reservation. In terms of accomplishments, this month we will be completing our campaign to dispose or transfer our zipper plates from Building 3019 out to Nevada. And that is a huge accomplishment for the program and one that we're very proud of. And next, of course, we'll be turning our attention to the remainder of the disposition campaign. So that's a big achievement for the program. With regard to historic preservation, we are going to be releasing the memorandum of agreement within a day or two. We have a few things to address from our headquarters, and then we will be releasing it. We are cautiously optimistic that we will get the memorandum of agreement signed by the signatory parties in time to not adversely impact the demolition of the K-25 building that is currently underway. The deadline for having a signed MOA so that there is no impact to the demolition project will be towards the end of July, mid-July to end of July, so we're optimistic that we might have something in place so that UCOR can proceed with those demolition activities. So that's a good thing. And otherwise, I know, this evening Laura's going to be talking about Mercury cleanup at Y12, and so she'll give you an update on those activities, but we are, of course, proceeding with certain things using our Recovery Act buyback dollars, and I'm sure Laura will talk more about that. So that's it in terms of a very brief update on what's happening right now. Are there any questions? Okay.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Dave?
I don't have anything to add this month, thanks.
Okay. John Ansley, TDEC. Sorry, I took him first.
Thank you, ma'am. I too have no announcements, but would be glad to answer any questions the board may have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, John Richards, the EPA.
Yeah, subbing for Tom Jones, who's always here, of course. I'm up here attending part of the workshop asset revitalization, which is today and continues through tomorrow. So.
Okay. Thank you. If there's no questions, we'll move on to the public comment period. Ed, are you doing that?
Yeah, the public comment period is now open. Please state your name and keep your comments to 3 minutes minimum or maximum. But our regular commenter, Norman Mulvannon. I guess I'll have to fill the gap till it gets together. Da 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 da. Okay, here he comes. We're on TV, and we were discovered. Thank you, Norm.
Hi, I'm Norman Mulvannon. I'm a member of the, former member of the board and former member of all the committees. And I still am a member of the committees. And I'm also the vice chair of the Citizens Oversight Panel. I have one thing I'd like to talk about tonight, which is kind of important, I think, and that is membership in the committees. We have a problem with the Stewardship Committee. And I'd like to remind everybody that stewardship is one of those things that's going to be coming up in the next 20 years, and it's going to be really important that we do a lot of work before that time. And I'd like to encourage everybody who has not picked a committee, or even people who have picked a committee and are leaving tonight, could suggest that they come by and start working with the Stewardship Committee. Even the old members are welcome, as I can evidence by myself. We've gotten to the point now where we have one member of the board and about 3 members of the public who are members of the Stewardship Committee. Now, to give you an example of what we're going to be doing, this next week we're going to be looking at a progress to automate the stewardship verification process. This is something that's been taken up by headquarters, encouraged by headquarters, and it's also being done here locally by Sally Brown of RSI and Lynn Sims of UCOR. And then there's a site transition fact sheet. This is an important document because it is a document that defines what it is that we have to do in order to change our category from a site under remediation to a site under stewardship. It's very important that we get this right. So I encourage everybody to use their intelligence and their enthusiasm for the Site-Specific Advisory Board to come to our stewardship meeting next week on Tuesday. Even the DDFO is welcome, as well as everybody else too. So enjoy this evening though. Ms. Laura Wilkinson will probably give you a very good talk.
Are there any other members of the public wishing to address the board? If not, as a Citizens Advisory Board to the DOE on environmental cleanup, so we want to encourage the community at large to attend and participate in our board meetings. And if you're unable to attend, please send in your questions and comments to the address shown on the screen. And the appropriate comments and questions will be read during the public comment section of the SSAB. And meeting schedules and ways to communicate with the board can be obtained by calling 241-4583 or by visiting our website. That's all.
Thank you. We'll move on now to the presentation topic tonight with Laura Wilkinson. Laura serves as a portfolio federal project director and heads EM's cleanup at the Y-12 National Security Complex and Oak Ridge National Laboratory. She is responsible for American Recovery and Reinvestment Act work with a total budget of over $630 million. She also directs base EM operations with an annual budget of approximately $140 million. Laura has over 20 years of experience managing and directing technical programs and projects. She holds a BS in Industrial Engineering. Thank you.
Good evening, and I appreciate the opportunity to give you an update tonight of the status and plans for cleanup at the Y-12 plant. As a matter of orienting ourselves, Y12 is the site that is in closest proximity to the city of Oak Ridge limits, south of the city of Oak Ridge, and that's what we'll be talking about today. Y12 covers an area of approximately 811 acres, and it has an active and enduring mission in support of our national security, in particular with the processing and storage of highly enriched uranium. And Y12, as some of you may know from the media reports, is undergoing a significant physical transformation. During the past decade, there has been a significant public and private sector investment in modernization of Y12 to bring the plant facilities to 21st century standards. On the right-hand side of the slide are some of the facilities that have been built or will be built at Y12, most significantly, and I'll point out the highly enriched uranium management facility, which is the national repository for highly enriched uranium and is being recently built, and the plant uranium processing facility, which will replace the current facilities for uranium processing. And in the midst of this modernization, legacy facilities from Y12 past missions remain. These are three of the large former Mercury process buildings that are right in the middle of this modernized campus with hundreds of thousands of square feet that is contaminated mainly with mercury, but also with other contaminants in some cases, such as uranium and beryllium. The cleanup at Y12 will be challenging and very complex. The scope of the cleanup includes over 100 excess facilities that will need to be decontaminated and demolished. I'm sorry about that. Can you help me here?
Laura, while somebody's helping there, is there a schedule, timeline that they're thinking of for the cleanup?
Yeah, I will address that as part of this part of the presentation. So we have over 100 excess facilities. This includes, as you can see from this slide, large processing facilities. There's a lot of smaller ancillary facilities that are included in that count. There's also the soils that need to be remediated and groundwater decisions that will need to be made in the future, and those are not planned to be made until the 2025 time frame. However, we have taken recent actions to ensure that the groundwater is contained within the site boundary, and that involves a pump and treat of the groundwater to make sure that we contain it within the site, and that is showing that is working pretty well. As far as the challenges with the cleanup, again, widespread mercury contamination in the soils, sediments, surface water, groundwater, and building debris. And facilities that are aging date back from the Manhattan Project and are continuing to deteriorate. And most importantly, that we're executing this cleanup in parallel with important execution of site missions. As far as the schedule, and I will address that here, we are currently proposing to accelerate the cleanup at Y12 after we complete the demolition of K25 and K27 at ETTP. So the K25 and K27 building demolition is planned to be completed by the end of 2016, early 2017. And at that point, we plan to ramp up the cleanup at Y12. And that's, currently in the stages of being definitized, if you will, with our stakeholders and so on. But that's basically from a schedule standpoint what the plan is. So under that plan, the cleanup will peak in the 2020s, but it will extend past the late 30s. So it's a very large and complex cleanup, as I mentioned before. So as I said, the main contaminant at Y12 is mercury. This mercury contamination resulted from historic industrial operations at Y12 from 1950 until 1963 that utilized about 20 million pounds of mercury. And of that 20 million pounds, about 10% or 2 million pounds was unaccounted for. And of that, about 700,000 pounds is estimated to have been released to the environment, to air, surface and groundwater, and soils and sediments. There are two primary areas at the plant of mercury contamination. On the west end is this area right here that is encompassed by the three large former processing facilities, Beta 4, Alpha 5, and Alpha 4. And this area is known as the West End Mercury area. And as I said before, the buildings and the soils underneath and around that area are contaminated with mercury. The other major area, source area, is the Alpha 2 facility area. Alpha 2 was a pilot facility for the processes that were later established and conducted in the West End Mercury area facilities. And Alpha 2 has a spring that flows underneath it that has mercury-contaminated water, and we have a treatment system at that facility to treat that water. Again, this mercury contamination is important because it's discharged to surface waters that originate into the plant as the operates for Poplar Creek, and as you can see, they flow into the city of Oak Ridge and eventually to the Clinch River. Over the past 2 decades, we have taken significant actions to address mercury. Most significantly, as I said, we have installed water treatment systems to remove mercury from the water, and we completed the cleanup of the lower East Fork Poplar Creek, which was a major removal action that was conducted in the late 90s. Even though we have taken all these actions, the regulatory standards for mercury in water and in fish tissue are still not being met. So that's why it's important that we address these contamination sources. As far as recent cleanup accomplishments, under the Recovery Act, we began the execution of 9 cleanup projects at Y12, and I am pleased to announce tonight that we have completed all those 9 projects, and we're now in the process of initiating an additional set of projects at Y12. So some highlights of that initial cleanup, we completed cleanup of the 7-acre old salvage yard, which is located at the west end of the plant. There was about 30,000 cubic yards of debris that was contaminated debris that was removed and disposed. And the remediation of the area was recently completed, and now that area is going to be made available for use by Y12. And I think they plan to use it as a parking area to support the construction of the UPF. We have made significant progress towards preparing the large process buildings for eventual D&D with this Recovery Act money. These are some examples. Alpha 5, which is one of the 3 large buildings on the west end, was totally cleaned out of loose legacy materials. About 1 million cubic feet of legacy material was removed and disposed, and as you can see, these are before and after pictures inside that facility. We completed characterization of the entire Alpha 5 building, and we also completed removal of some legacy material from Beta 4. Recently, we completed the cleanup and relining of the sewer system lines that discharge water from the West End Mercury area, and that's what we call the WEMA Storm Drain project. And when we first completed that effort, we saw a spike, actually during and after the completion of that effort, we saw a spike of mercury discharges from that area of the plant because we were upsetting the system and perhaps facilitated some loose mercury flow inside the sewer system. But as time has gone by, the system is stabilizing and is going back in that area at least to the levels that it was before we started the cleanup. And our hope and expectation is that those levels will continue to decrease because we have eliminated a pathway for contaminated soil into the sewer system, which eventually discharges into the Operates for Poplar Creek. We completed the demolition of 5 facilities in the east area of the plant, and that includes 4 facilities in the former biology complex at Y12. And we also included, completed the decontamination and removal of a highly contaminated filter house system in Building 9206. As part of Recovery Act, we completed construction of Cell 6 of the on-site circular disposal cell, and that basically expanded the capacity of the cell to its maximum capacity, which is 2.2 million cubic yards. And we also completed expansions and upgrades in the Oak Ridge Reservation landfills. So some of the work in progress, as I said, we completed these first Recovery Act projects, and as a result of efficiencies and cost savings in the execution of those projects, we have money left that we call buyback to initiate additional projects, and our focus for that money is anything that is directly related to address mercury at the plant. And this is a list of some of the high priority projects that we're pursuing or have initiated. And I'm not going to go over this list in detail, but I wanted to highlight a couple of important things that we're doing, or most important things that we're doing. We're completing the characterization of the EU9 area or 8110 area, and that's an accessible area that is highly contaminated with mercury, and we're completing the characterization of that area by September of this year in planning for subsequent remediation of that area. This point right here is what we call outfall 200, and that is, as I mentioned before, is the outfall that has the largest contribution of mercury discharges to the Operates for Poplar Creek. And it discharges water from the western Mercury area, and that's the outfall where we want to focus our efforts to reduce mercury discharges to the creek. So our plan is to build a large-scale water treatment facility in this area to treat that water and reduce the mercury levels in the creek, and we expect that it will be a significant reduction if we do that. However, at this point, we're in the conceptual design stage, and we're doing the conceptual design with Recovery Act with the hope and expectation that we will get funding in the near term to begin the construction of the plant. And we're also upgrading and expanding the capability for removing elemental mercury from the sewer system before it reaches the water. The plant operations periodically remove mercury from manholes to get them out of the system before it gets to the water, and we are putting collection traps to enhance that and enhancing the points where mercury is recovered at. So in the near term, our plans are focused in 3 areas. As I said, first, in reducing the mercury flux in the water, and for that, we're executing these buyback Recovery Act projects, and we're focusing on completing those to contribute to that reduction. And as a build-up of that, as I mentioned before, we want to treat the water in outfall 200, and we want to, as we go, remediate hotspots to try to keep mercury from entering the sewer system and eventually the water. The other focus area in the near term is to plan for the future. We want to make sure that we collect the characterization data that we need to close characterization gaps, and that we make sure that we have the right technologies and the right approaches to complete this cleanup and waste disposition in an efficient way. There are currently technologies available to do remediation, treatment, and disposal of mercury-contaminated soils and debris, but they're very, very expensive. So what we want to do is to identify areas where we can do some treatability studies and technology development to try to reduce the risks of future cleanup and as well as the cost. And finally, we want to continue whatever actions we can take in the near term to prepare the facilities for eventual D&D in the future when we take the pause at ETTP. And of course, these things are contingent upon the availability of funds. In the long term, as I said, we want to address the sources of the contamination, which are those large processing facilities or former processing facilities, and the soils underneath them. So we want to proceed with the demolition of those facilities and either remediate or stabilize the soils, depending on what we can work out and negotiate with the FFA parties. And we want to do this remediation and clean up from west to east, because that's the way that the water, the surface water and groundwater flows from the plant. In order to complete this cleanup, we will need additional disposal capacity, on-site disposal capacity. The current circular disposal cell was over half full through the end of 2011. And is projected to be full sometime between 2016 and 2019, depending on budgets and work execution. And because it takes approximately 4 years of lead time to get regulatory approvals, public consultation, and procure, design, and construct the facility, we are starting now to develop the regulatory documents that we need to get this process kicked off. And that way we hopefully will ensure that we'll have this capacity available when we need it. So in conclusion, our vision for Y12 is to address all the legacy contamination and complete the cleanup to ensure environmental protection and health protection, and to ensure that we meet our regulatory commitments. We want to complement the plans that NNSA has for a reduced high security footprint, and to be complementary of a modernized production facility. And that's all I had as far as the presentation, and open to any questions.
Yeah. Tom?
I got to admit, this Mercury thing has got me totally confused. I thought I read in the paper just a week or so ago that a study had been completed and that Mercury wasn't a problem. And yet it seems like everything is continuing on. So did I misread the article? Or what value is that study? Or,
You did not misread the article. It's a report that was recently issued by ATSDR, Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry, and they are an independent government agency, and they did a study of the data that we have collected over the years related to mercury at Y12, and they concluded that from a health protection standpoint, mercury is not a problem. However, they acknowledged in their report that they did not look at environmental protection, and that their conclusions are based on the fish consumption advisories being adhered to. So the fact, which in contrast to that report, is that there are state of Tennessee and EPA regulatory standards that we are not meeting at Operates for Poplar Creek, and we have records of decision that are intended to take us to a point where we meet those standards, and this cleanup is basically in support of complying with those records of decision and achieving those regulatory standards that we're required to meet.
Does that mean that the regulatory standards are in question and they should be looked at? Or,
I would let the regulators answer that question if they will. I don't believe that's the case, but
No, sir, that is not the case. The regulatory criteria are not in question. The findings of the ATSDR acknowledge that institutional controls were in place to prevent exposure to humans. And as long as those controls remained in place, then there were no health hazards associated with the contamination of mercury in the environment. However, they did not deal with the ecological impact of this material in the environment. And as Laura indicated, DOE is in violation of a number of water quality and fish flesh advisories, water quality criteria and fish flesh advisories. Would also point out that Laura had a picture of elemental mercury in the soil at the the site, it's illegal to dispose of liquid mercury into the environment. So these situations will have to be remedied in some manner. Our first effort is to remove the risk. If that's not sufficient, then we will have to institutionally control the risk. But the criteria that's being applied is not in question.
Anything else, Tom? Steve?
Laura, as we know, mercury is not the only contaminant at Y12, and I wanted to ask about the status of 3 others. The first one being beryllium. Can you tell us about the distribution of beryllium as a contaminant at Y12, its chemical form, and what's being done to clean it up? The second one would be the dense non-aqueous phase liquids that have been detected under Y12 under the main plant area at a depth of over 400 feet. And as I think we all know, you can't get DNAPLs out very easily, so what's being done with them in order to clean them up, or are they being left in place? And the third would be mercury, uranium in the main plant area. Anything you can enlighten us on the beryllium, the DNAPLs, and the uranium, please?
Focusing on these large former mercury process buildings, which are our priority for cleanup based on what we've just discussed during the presentation. Of the 3 facilities, Alpha 5 has both uranium and beryllium contamination, and as we address the demolition and cleanup of Alpha 5, we will have to deal with that contamination as part of the cleanup. So that's part of that plan. As far as the other 2 facilities, Beta 4 and Alpha 4 don't have the prevalency of uranium and beryllium and mercury contamination, uranium and beryllium contamination as Alpha 5 has. So that's the priority in terms of, the shorter term, if you will, for addressing that at Y12. And of course, any uranium and beryllium contamination that is, part of the plan that is encountering our plans to addressing these buildings will have to be addressed as well. Is that?
Can you tell us anything about the beryllium with regard to its chemical or physical nature? Is it particulate beryllium? Is it a chemical compound? Is it mobile? Excuse me, I'll shut up.
Do you care to help us out here? That's not my area of expertise, and I don't want to.
I'm Terry Cothran. I work in environmental compliance at Y12. Steve, the beryllium has been looked at as part of the Phase 2 soils rod there. As I recall, it was a contaminant of concern, but not of such that it needed to be cleaned up for protection of the industrial worker. It's not as widespread as, say, depleted uranium or mercury contamination there. It will be looked at further in future rods that pertain to surface water and groundwater, I'm sure. The uranium contamination is there, mostly in the form of U-238 in the soils that we have characterized to date. Regarding the DNAPLs, I think that'll probably be taken up in a future record of decision dealing with groundwater.
That's right.
I
apologize, I wasn't finished answering that. The whole question, the DNAPLs will be addressed as part of the groundwater decisions that are not until out in the future. We currently don't have any concrete plans to address the DNAPLs.
Chuck?
Terry, as long as you have the microphone, don't let you off easy. I guess the general question is when these things are done, is it the expectation or stated goal that fish and the other environmental insults that are existing today will be gone and people will be able to eat the fish out of the river?
Well, my response to that would be go back to what John said. Ultimately, you would aim at remediation reducing or at least minimizing the institutional controls you had so that the uses of the stream are
I should add there, though, that there's an effort that is being undertaken by the Office of Science to investigate the methylation mechanisms of mercury in fish. And what we have seen over the years is that as we have taken actions to reduce mercury in water, there has not been a corresponding reduction in mercury in fish tissue. And that is because the mechanism that mercury methylates in fish is really complex, and there's not a one-to-one correlation. So I think that's a big question mark that the Office of Science is helping us, hopefully get to an answer to, but it's something that is really complex, and we don't have an answer to at this point.
And on a related question, you made mention when you were talking about the storm sewer being lined, and obviously soils were disturbed and discharges increased for a while, but they've only reverted back to the previous levels. Was that expected? And if it's expected, what was the goal of lining the sewer if it wasn't to?
Yeah, it was not expected, and as I said, we expect that as time goes by, we will get to where there's been a reduction in those levels. We haven't gotten there yet because I don't think the system has yet reached equilibrium.
How long ago was the project completed?
The project was just completed, but we started seeing the spikes when we were in the middle of it.
Gloria?
Probably just have a little comment. Tom asked earlier that about mercury contamination. He said, "Is it possible the regulation will change?" That I read some paper like most of like NRC or DOE when you deal with risk evaluation, a lot of calculation on dose exposure. We can see those reports, but not necessarily EPA. There are a lot of calculation, probably not really focused on the dose. It's still focused on some release limitation in that nature. So maybe in the next 5 or 10 years, EPA will gradually modify some of their evaluation, and then maybe those release limits can maybe change. Mercury may be one of the case.
Yeah.
So,
what we are anticipating is that based on anticipated regulation in the mercury area, and EPA can jump in if you have anything to add here, but we expect those limits to be more restrictive than what we have in the records of decision based on what we've seen so far, because they want to attempt to make a correlation between mercury in fish tissue and what levels have to be in the water to achieve the expected level in fish tissue. And in order to do that, the goal that would be established would be around 80 parts per trillion, which is higher than the 51 parts per trillion in the ambient air water quality criteria, but it's lower than the 200 parts per trillion in our existing interim record of decision. And that's a goal, by the way. But so I don't think that there's going to be a point in the near future where those levels would go down, if that's what you're asking.
There is some confusion and contradiction and conflict that I hear. And this is a great presentation. I think that Laura and those folks have put together something very good in terms of a plan, a long-term schedule, and goals and objectives to remove and contain the mercury. But I'm same as Tom. I read that report, and I guess I thought, well, okay, but now it's been clarified a little. But those of us who had attended the chairs meeting in Paducah were told this. DOE's representatives, now if I got this wrong, Dave or anyone, let me know. But they, when the issue of mercury came up, they were not that concerned, nor is it high on their priority. Therefore, when we talk in terms of budgeting, that is going to be like down at the bottom. So that's what I came away with. But this presentation tells me that here at Oak Ridge, we're very concerned, and it is a high priority for us, and it is not, meeting the standards. They're not being met in the water and the fish. But I think this board really needs to keep abreast of this particular issue, Mercury. I mean, I thought all this time we were hearing it is a big concern here. But you go outside of Oak Ridge and it doesn't seem to be. So I think that that's a conflict. I mean, did I hear something different, or did you hear that, Dave?
I think you're referring to the budget present, basically, right, to the extent money is priority.
Right.
It's correct that if, watching Terry Taborowski's presentations on budget priorities for DOE, Mercury didn't get a lot of attention. That's correct.
So thank you, Dave. And that's what I'm concerned about. And that's why I want this board to really work with our local DOE and keep on top of this issue and keep pushing for the budget for this. Yeah, so
I'll just mention a couple of things that may or may not be helpful, but I think I've talked previously about the competing risks that we have on the reservation. The nuclear and radiological risk is one category. The life cycle cost risk is another, and then the third is the environmental risk. And we absolutely believe that our greatest environmental risk here on the Oak Ridge Reservation is the release of mercury from the Y12 site. And I believe that we've been successful in communicating that message and having our headquarters understand that it is a priority, and that is somewhat evidenced by their agreement that after getting our highest risk facilities at the East Tennessee Technology Park down, that we should turn our attention towards the mercury cleanup work that's needed at the Y12 plant. So I do feel confident that we have gotten a good understanding and an agreement with our headquarters that's where we should turn next. With regard to the budget, of course you never know what we're going to end up with, but if you look in the fiscal year 13 House and Senate marks, you'll see that the Senate mark actually has plussed up Oak Ridge's budget by $25 million specifically for mercury cleanup. So we of course don't know what the final budget will be for fiscal year 13, but we certainly have recognition and acknowledgement on the Senate side that there is a need to begin to fund mercury cleanup work at the site after the Recovery Act work is completed. So that's just a few data points to address some of your comments.
Thank you, Sue. Howard?
In talking about characterization of soil, is there a stepwise process that's used to do this? Is there an algorithm that's followed to do this?
Yeah, we follow the DQO process, working with the FFA parties in basically going through those algorithms and coming up with an agreed to level of characterization that is compliant with with that guidance and that is satisfactory to the FFA parties.
Has the board ever had a review of that? Have we seen how they do this? It would be an interesting topic in my estimation. I'd like to see how thoroughly they're characterizing these. How deep do they go? Do they characterize it by each element that they're looking at, or do they characterize them in general? It would be interesting to understand the process by which they're analyzing this soil.
On the DQO process, yeah, it might be an interesting topic to go through our data quality objective process to gain a better understanding of that. So that's a good suggestion. Melissa's writing it down for a future topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Greg?
Thank you. I made the mistake of reading the article in the paper also. And I've been listening. Well, no, it's fun. I've been listening to this, and I'm hearing numbers. First of all, you mentioned this stuff been spilled 50 years ago. And you stopped spilling it 40-ish years ago. So it's been there a while. And I have heard that all the little fishies in the rivers all the way down to my house are edible, although I wouldn't eat them. And we're hearing that the water samples are 81 parts per 4 gazillion, and EPA allows 50. But what's bad for health
let me clarify
is 200?
That there is a goal, an interim goal in the record of decision for 200 parts per trillion. The actual water quality criteria of the state of Tennessee is 51 parts per trillion, and there is an effort underway to try to implement a middle point between the 51 and the 200, which would be around 80.
Well, my understanding is 200 is the guru's thing of what is considered unhealthful. Isn't that the magic number?
The 200 parts per trillion, as Laura indicated, was an interim goal that DOE was to achieve in a 5-year period of the previous MPDS permit. They have failed to meet that goal, but that was the goal to meet. They were to undertake actions.
Let me put this all in a simple question. Are we trying to achieve a contamination level after 50 years, and everything I have read and heard here is it's not spreading to a health hazard in any manner, shape, or form, to meet a goal established by some agency but has no bearing on what's hazardous to health and what's non-hazardous to health?
Okay. The 80, I think it's 87. It's 80, 81, 87. The 51 parts per trillion, which is the criteria, is a modeled number. The 87...
Whose model?
EPA's.
Okay. And I'm not going to say you pulled a number out of the air, but no, it's just a number.
It's based on ambient water quality, and it's an estimate that is intended to be generic for the nation. The 87 is a number that is actually calculated based on in-stream water quality data.
Yes.
So, but the 81 is the criteria that is considered to be protective of human health and the biota. There is no pathway to human risk at this point in time because of the institutional controls that are in place. The signs that keep people...
Well, that's my point. As long as the institutional controls currently are eliminating any risk to humans, what's the impact of doing nothing more?
Right. So if I can try.
Oh, please. It's just...
The bottom line is...
No, they're very good questions.
There's a lot of stupid here.
No, very, very good questions. And just to I guess, couch it, because we really haven't mentioned what the releases currently are in terms of all these different numbers that have been established for goals. The releases, of course, fluctuate depending on the rainfall and the amount of migration that's going on within the environment. And they can be, on average, anywhere around 400 parts per trillion, and at other times they can go up to the thousands of parts per trillion. So that's where we are today with regard to the releases that are leaving the site. We are required, although human health, of course, is of paramount importance, and that's really what we want to make sure that we're addressing in terms of protection, we are also required to ensure protection of the environment, which includes not only the ecological resources that are in the streams and whatnot, but also environmental quality components like water quality. So although there is no immediate health impact, and we're very happy to hear that and to have that validated by ATSDR, it does not relieve us of our obligations to also protect the environment. And so the work that we're doing and the work that Laura has proposed and the work that is planned is to eliminate those releases that are occurring to ensure that the environment is protected. With regard to the fish advisories, we are fortunate that we are able to have those institutional controls in place and that we can do what we can to ensure that they are followed, but the regulations do not allow us to rely on those in perpetuity. So we also, in addition to protecting the environment, cannot depend on the fish advisories forevermore to say that we're done and no further action is required. So it's really for those reasons that we're required to continue to clean up the Y12 site. Did that help?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to back off on that.
Well, people, there's a lot of opinion, you know, about the requirements and how stringent they are, and et cetera, et cetera.
It's been brought up here before. We all, my contemporaries, played with Mercury as kids. We'd break a thermometer and put it on dimes and make them shiny.
Right.
And then we found out when we were old and got all screwed up that that's what did it. And my concern is we're not just going after this because a regulation says we have to, rather than we're going after it because it actually will do a benefit to the community and the people.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a major health risk. There has to be something other than spending the amount of money that you all are talking about spending on Mercury for something other than an arbitrary number EPA said this is what you have to meet. And I'm not picking on you, John, you know that.
I understand.
But, you know, I don't know what the natural mercury content is if you go out in the middle of Kansas and dig up a handful of soil and just say how much mercury's in it. I don't know what the concentrations are, but I know it exists pretty much all over.
Right.
And you all played with a lot here and it leaked. But my question is still, what's the impact of doing nothing? And has that ever been evaluated from?
Yes, the impact of doing nothing is one of the alternatives that's considered in the circle process, and it was not accepted.
Thank you. That answers it, John.
Thank you. Jan?
Okay, I missed the Mercury article that has everybody so bothered, so I'm going to ask a different question. Your second bullet up there, the high security footprint reduced. First of all, do you have any goal or estimate of how much that footprint's going to be reduced? And secondly, when you say high security footprint, is that the same thing as the contamination footprint?
Yeah, the high security footprint relates to the protection of the activities that are being conducted by NNSA to support the processing and storage of uranium. And what NNSA's goal is to reduce that footprint and minimize it as much as possible, and that's with the aim to reduce the cost of operating this facility. And some of the buildings that we expect to have to clean up because they're contaminated with mercury and uranium and other contaminants are on the way of that footprint reduction. So our goal is to, in addition to ensuring that we're protecting the environment and the health and safety at the site and of the public,